Whilst we're looking at pictures of President Buhari, who was Nigeria's former leader, let me just remind you that Muhammadu Buhari was born in December 1942 in Daura in Katsina in the far north of Nigeria, near the border with Niger. At the time, Nigeria was, of course, controlled by the British. It would be at least another 18 years before this country gained independence, and so he would have been around the age of 18 in 1960, October 1960, when Nigeria gained independence. Buhari's father, who died when he was 4, was of the Fulani ethnic group, and his mother, who essentially brought him up, was Kanuri. In an interview in 2012, President Buhari spoke of being his father's 23rd child and his mother's 13th. He said his only recollection of his father was of the two of them and one of his half-brothers being thrown from the back of a horse. So he obviously was something of a rider. The young Buhari attended primary school in Daura and then boarding school in the city of Katsina. After leaving school, he was admitted to the Nigerian Military Training College, joining the Nigerian Army shortly after independence. He then undertook officer training in the UK from 1962 to 1963, and then began his steady climb up the ranks of the army. Of course, everybody sees Mr. Buhari as a very strict disciplinarian, and he himself attributed that disciplinarian bent, if you like, to spending his formative years at boarding school, where corporal punishment was the norm, and in the, of course, as well in the military, where strict discipline was also the norm. I mean, he said he was lucky to have experienced such tough environments, which taught him to work hard. And we will, I mean, that's just a little snippet of the life of President Buhari. And if you're just joining us, within the last couple of hours, it's been announced that Nigeria's former President Muhammadu Buhari, one of the longest ruling leaders this country has ever known, has died at the age of 82. And with me in the studio now is the immediate former Nigerian Foreign Minister, Geoffrey Onyeama, who served for 8 years under President Buhari. Minister, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Your reaction to the passing of President Buhari?
Well, one of absolute shock and deep sadness. I learned he was in London, but I thought it was for a routine medical checkup. And so when I heard the news, I was completely devastated, actually.
Yeah, I mean, just give us a sense of the kind of person he was, because obviously you shared a very close relationship with him as his foreign minister for 8 years, basically through his 2 terms in office.
Yes, he's an amazing boss, and I think much misunderstood person by the rest of the country. Very charismatic, globally. And as you talked about him being a strict disciplinarian, I would say he's very disciplined. His self-discipline was absolutely, amazing. He was very sharp, very quick, and somebody that could take decisions and stick to them. So he really had all the qualities and that one really requires to be an excellent leader, and he was.
And was he also, there was an element of him, from what I understand, of extraordinary loyalty, that he sort of stuck with those who he believed were there to support him, and he never kind of played politics with people in that sense.
Yes, I think, he had his expectations, and was very clear what he expected. And essentially, once he saw that you met those expectations, he would be very, very supportive of you. And I have one or two stories that one can tell about that. I remember, for instance, we were in Saudi Arabia at the time, and they were in the process of setting up an Islamic military alliance. And I had been asked to go. We were on a state visit to Saudi Arabia, and then after I went to the foreign ministry, and had this agreement to sign presented to me, but it was in Arabic. So I was, so I said, well, I can't sign this. It's in Arabic, And then they got an English translation, and I saw it was going to be very complicated because it really involved Nigeria being at loggerheads with quite a number of countries. And so I bought some time and said to them, okay, look, listen, the president was in doing a Lesser Hajj, and I was, the capital in Riyadh. So I called him, and sent the message, sent the text, and advised that, look, listen, I think we shouldn't sign this, and it's going to put us in an awkward position. And he sent back and said, I agree with you totally. He'd read it and everything, and so go ahead and tell them. So I told them, but they wouldn't take no for an answer, and they sent very high emissaries to him, and he said to them, look, what my vice president, what my foreign minister told you is exactly my position. And there are lots of other cases like that. So yes, he was also very, very loyal, and supported his in that case his ministers.
Indeed, and thank you for sharing that with us. But in terms of his entry into politics, I mean, just looking historically back, I mean, he was something of a sort of self-styled converted Democrat. Because, I mean, he sort of came back into power, having served as head of state, military head of state initially. He then returned to power through elections. But he was always a bit sort of aloof, certainly to those of us who were not as close to him as you were. He always came across as a bit aloof and austere. So that made him not a very natural politician, didn't it?
Well, he's somebody that, would give that, impression. He's not, he's not a talkative, I
mean, you expect politicians to kind of, be men of the people, as it were, or people of the people.
Well, one thing about him is that, his word was his bond, pretty much, I saw him on the campaign trail. And he was able to get up there and speak, to people. He was very charismatic. He is probably the only Nigerian that had like about 12 million votes, certain,
in the bag,
counted and in the bag.
Yeah.
And it takes, tremendous personality.
Yeah, but some suggest that might also be because he's alleged to have had a very strong sort of regional and ethnic bent towards a particular section of this country.
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of people from around the country, I think the support, of him was widespread, actually, especially, coming into the first elections. He really garnered a lot of support in other parts of the country. But, as I think, you're saying he's not a natural politician. I would say, well, maybe to the extent that, he saw politics very much as a means to delivering something really for the country, and that was basically it. And interestingly enough, he was a true Democrat. When he did come into office and people would try to push him in one way or the other, he would say no, let the democratic process play out. And he never for one second, I mean, people have this recollection, of the sort of a strong man leader, but
That didn't play out.
Once it became
his,
a democracy,
yes.
he absolutely insisted that you play by the rules, and you know, and he was fond of telling this story that you know, when he was the military head of state, and you know, after the coup, and they tried a number of you know, former civilian leaders, and he said, you know, in those days, as far as he was concerned, you're guilty, and the onus was on you to prove yourself innocent. But he said, well, now as a Democrat, his hands are tied, and people kind of urge him to take decisive action. But he tells them, look, now, you know, you're innocent until proved guilty. So,
right.
so
he became a sort of extreme Democrat.
Absolutely,
like.
you know, and a true Democrat,
right.
Basically.
And certainly not in the Nigerian context, that made him unique.
Absolutely, you know, absolutely. But also, I think, you know, he was somebody that went into politics and really saw it as a means to deliver for the country.
So what did he deliver?
And not, you know, and not in terms of what was in it for him personally.
Yeah, I see what you mean in that sense, that he was certainly, a lot of people would agree with you that whatever you accuse him of, it wasn't of personally enriching himself or taking advantage of his position for himself personally.
Absolutely.
And he sought to reduce state corruption, didn't he? That was one of his cardinal objectives. But I wonder what your assessment is of how much he succeeded in that, given the kind of environment he found himself in politically in Nigeria.
Yeah, you know, the thing, you know, with corruption, and we all talk about corruption and so on, but ultimately, you know, it's about the institutions and how strong your institutions are. And I think he really wanted to strengthen the institutions, but also not control them and manipulate the institutions. And so to that extent, you know, he tried to lay the groundwork for greater transparency in governance and so forth. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, he was very strong, as you said earlier, when it comes to discipline. And obviously we talked about corruption and so on. But how did that sort of discipline manifest itself in his presidency?
Well, certainly I think it manifested itself certainly with his leadership team. You know, I would say he was somebody that also led by example, you know, and so he himself, you know, as a person. I'll give an example, you know, for instance, more with foreign affairs, you know, he would attend meetings, he would be very demanding in the quality of the documents prepared, the timeliness of the preparations and so forth. And he would go through the documents with a fine-tooth comb, you know, and making corrections and so forth. And also in the presentation at meetings, he would not tolerate going in and out and, you know, that sort of approach. But, you know, to be there at the meeting, to have good reports and so forth. So he set an example, you know, of discipline at that kind of level. And then also, you know, in the Federal Executive Council meetings and so forth, he also expected, you know, a certain level of discipline and so forth. And also in the documentation that was prepared, he would not, you know, he could be quite tough, you know, when he needed to be. So you know, as far as the leadership team was concerned, he you know, instilled that discipline, I think, in his team.
Right. And what was he like as a person? I mean, could he sort of crack a joke? Was he, because people had the impression he just wasn't that kind of person.
Yeah, and this is just the amazing thing about it. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He really had a fantastic sense of humor. He loved to laugh and to make others laugh, and very quick-wit, very quick-witted. And he was extremely liked. For instance, when he'd go to England, the present king would go to great lengths to share some time with him, And I remember once he happened to be in Scotland at the time, and asked if he could come to Scotland to have tea and to chat, And ditto with the former Archbishop of Canterbury, and then also other heads of state. And he was, but not just liked, but really respected. And a good example of that.
What was the basis for that respect?
Whenever they talked about him, it was always with some reverence. And I think a lot of it must have had to do with the past history, of the man and his reputation and what they knew of him, And so he was really given that respect. And I remember when they were trying to get the president of Gambia, then Jammeh, out after he wouldn't respect the election result. Everybody wanted him to be on the small team that will go and negotiate with him. He finally agreed to go. And so there was another meeting in Mali after having spoken to this guy, and he had made it clear he wasn't going to leave. And he said, and this was I think on a Saturday or Sunday, and he identified 4 or 5 African countries, presidents who were there, and he asked them to be in Abuja on Monday, 2 days later. And they all kind of looked at themselves, but because it was President Buhari making this request, they all came, And interestingly enough, and a lot of people don't know this, during that lunch, discussing about how to get this, to deal with the Gambian situation, out of the blue, towards the end of the lunch, he asked for his chief of defense staff, and who was summoned, and he told him, get your counterparts from these 4 African countries, put together a plan to move to Gambia, air, sea, and land. Nobody saw that coming. And that's what happened.
Decisive moment.
Very decisive,
yeah.
and the rest is history, as they say, because the Air Force that buzzed Banjul and all that, and this guy said, okay, we've had it. But the point I'm trying to make is that his peers had tremendous respect for him. It's not easy to just tell people out of the blue, 5 of you, please be in Abuja in 2 days' time, but coming from him, so he was liked very, very much, but also respected, and that is something that came throughout, and that made a huge difference in terms of what he could achieve at the bilateral level.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And as far as you were concerned, in terms of your sort of relationship with him, I mean, how did you come to be his foreign minister? Did you know him before? How did he approach you? Just give us a bit of background there.
No, well, I think everybody knows now because certainly after my tribute to his then chief of staff, Abba Kyari, who recommended me to him, and and I had never met him before. And
well, he was obviously impressed with your pedigree and your CV.
I don't know, but what I can say...
Well, he must have been, which is why you became the foreign minister.
What I can say is that, we worked very, very well together for 8 years. I came away with the utmost respect for him. And I just wished somehow that the country as a whole could have got a closer idea and glimpse of what the man was really like, because he was a real patriot, and all he really wanted to do was the very best for Nigeria. And there were moments when, he was able to be decisive and to act very quickly. I remember once upon a time, for instance, during a Security Council meeting, when the consensus seemed to be at that time was going in the direction of a state of emergency in the southeast, and he just put it aside and wouldn't, go along. So he had, he was not easy to manipulate, once, he had a sense of the direction he wanted to go in.
And of course, whilst you say, and with some credence, that he was quick with decision making, the nickname Nigerians gave him was Baba Goslow, which essentially meant that he took forever to make decisions. Even the cabinets that you were part of that came into office, it took him about almost 6 months to get that cabinet off the ground. Nigerians, let's face it, are very good with nicknames. Ibrahim Babangida, who was a former military president, he was known as Maradona, and that name has kind of stuck. But, is there some justification to the Baba Goslow moniker, do you think?
No, not at all, not at all. If you look at the appointments of the cabinet, for instance, if you have to appoint 36 people from different countries, and you're having inputs being made from all over the place, it's going to take quite a while to settle on the 36 people that you want. So I don't think that was a basis for that.
In fairness to him, sorry, finish.
Yeah, in essence, as you say, he's very decisive. You make a proposal to him, that's very, very clear, bang. He quickly sees straight through to the essence and the core of the issue, whatever it is, or if it's an appointment, and he decides very, very quickly. He doesn't.
In fairness to him, he was responding to that nickname, Baba Goslow, a few years later, and his response was that, yes, we are slow, and I'm quoting him directly, yes, we are slow because the system is slow. It's not Baba that is slow, but it is the system. So I'm going by this system, and I hope we will make it. But you made some very interesting points earlier, which I think will serve to be part of his eternal legacy. And that is the fact that he presided over that 2022-2023 presidential election, but for the first time in this country, as a sitting president, he didn't appear to be bothered about who his successor would be. He left it to democracy to choose a successor.
And it was consistent with how he had been throughout. He never interfered with the system in place, notwithstanding all the pressures on him, one way or the other. And he mentioned to me a few times when we were, outside the country and so forth, that the process should play out. And this is a democracy, so let the people decide, let the system play itself out. And he was very, very true to that in everything that he did. His relationship also, with the various arms of government, the legislature, for instance, the judiciary, he accorded utmost respect and accepted their independence and their process. He never for 1 second ever tried to manipulate the legislature, for instance, or the judiciary. For him, it was do your job, do the right thing, and that's all you need to do. Right. And that was the same with also his team. Listen, we agree on a program, and I just want you to do it. If you have any issues, come to me, keep me informed. But this is a basic direction, and you follow it. So he was a perfect Democrat, but also a wonderful leader. He did have a very clear vision of where he wanted to go, but he was also a realist. One of the things he always used to say was, you can't hop, skip, and jump where development is concerned. It's not something that you can do overnight. And he said this, when I think about it, all these industrialized countries have been going through that process, for centuries. So, so he was a realist, but at the same time, he had a vision and a passion for the country.
And of course, we all remember that Naira swap policy, which took place before the elections in 2023. The idea at the time was to limit the influence of money in the 2023 election. That was another attempt, clearly measurable attempt of him trying to curb the impact of corruption in this country and on the elections. But then it was I don't know to what extent one would say that it was misinterpreted, because the policy was believed to have been targeted at preventing the current president from becoming president, even though he had been chosen as the APC candidate. I mean, that policy, of course, involved the confiscation of trillions of old Naira notes and their replacement with new notes for the highest denominations. It created a lot of problems, didn't it? Both politically and economically, because, I mean, from an economic point of view, there were simply not enough notes. And from a political point of view, it created the sense that, you're trying to undermine the candidate of your own party.
Yeah, well, I think everybody knows, and if anybody wants to, if you want to really be honest about it, everybody knows that he wanted the best person to come through the system. Whoever the part. I mean, of course, they'll have pressures. People would lobby him and things like that. But he never, ever, ever, for 1 second, gave any indication of trying to, force anything on the electorate. He felt that, look, listen, what he used to say very often. I tried 4 times to become president of this country. I went to the Supreme Court, 4 times or whatever. He would remind everybody. And so if anybody wants to take on this position, just be ready to go through whatever it takes. He acts also on advice. And, if he's told that, look, listen, to have a level playing field, we need to try and address what the role of money in the process. Then this is the steps we have to take. And in his case, it was something he had done before. So and he knew why he had done it about 3 decades, 2 decades, 3 decades earlier. So for him, he might have bought the argument that this could be one of the ways to try to have a more level playing field. But where he's concerned, I can't speak for anybody else, but where he was concerned, there was never any question of him believing that this was targeting any individual.
And of course, as we assess his presidency and the kind of person that he was, you talked about him being quite forthright, being something of a Democrat, even though that really was not his sort of history, but he got into it and filled the shoes fairly well. But there was another element during his presidency that most people had the impression that his health was declining. And that caused him to take significant absences from work, especially during his first term. So a lot of people seem to feel that even though he kind of reinvented himself as a Democrat and all the sort of the things that go with being a Democrat, which is to be open, transparent, and all the rest of it, there was no such commitment to transparency concerning his own health, which left a lot of Nigerians, uninformed about the fitness of their own head of state.
It's interesting you should say that. He had a period where he was away for 3 months. Apart from that, he never had any other health issues. And I often said to him, I said, Mr. President, I don't know what they gave you during the 3 months when you had health issues, but whatever it is, I wish I could get some of it, because he was as strong
as an ox,
as anybody else. I mean, you know, at cabinet meetings, you know, sometimes they would go on for 3 hours, 4 hours, you know, and he would never, in 8 years that I've been there in cabinet, he has never once got up or anything, like go to the bathroom. All the other ministers, everybody getting up, going out, coming in, going for a tea, coming in, going out. He's always just there. So he's physically strong, and then mentally on the ball, because he would also ask very searching, pertinent questions, you know, on the memos that are presented. So he was extremely strong. And then when we go out for meetings and conferences, he would be the only head of state that would sit there throughout, deliver his statement, but also, you know, listen to what the others have to say, and, you know, take notes and so forth. And he never believed. He always felt that it was really impolite, you know, to get up when your colleagues are speaking. And so he was as strong as an ox. And I remember once, actually, I think it was in Iran at a meeting of the royal meeting or something, and he. So I think it was coming out. And somebody wanted to meet with him, and they asked me, and I remember the scope, you know, asked me to go and tell him that he was needed for a meeting, and I think it's over there. I wasn't very keen to, you know, but I went to say to him, look, will you be able to just come out for? He was very upset, you know. Don't disturb me, my friend, you know, which I didn't find amusing.
I hope your microphone isn't scratching against your shirt.
No.
It seems to be. Well, I mean, I don't know what they can hear.
Okay.
It seems to be upturned against your shirt. But I mean, one of I think the clearest examples of this strength that you said he has. I mean, it's not so much physical, it's mental, isn't it? A lot of it is mental.
Both.
Yeah, because I mean, after 3 failed attempts, you touched on this earlier, I mean, he eventually achieved a historic victory, you know, in elections in 2015, and he became, in that sense, a historical figure, because he became the first opposition candidate to defeat an incumbent in the history of Nigeria. And that was a seminal moment, wasn't it?
It was. He is a history maker. He's a phenomenon. Oh, he was a phenomenon, you know, he absolutely was. I think this country should, you know, really be proud that we had such a leader. I think that, you know, for me, misunderstood by a large segment of the population, but really a great leader, great personality, and you know, around the world, you know, he's seen as an icon, as an iconic figure, and really respected by
all his peers. But in terms of his political ideology, was there one? I mean, we know, for example, that he was very popular with the poor of the North, known as the Talakawa in sort of the Hausa language. Was he something of a socialist in that sense? I mean, is there an ideology that you can actually point to that sort of drove him politically?
It's an interesting point. You know, we've had discussions with him on that, and I wouldn't say that you can pigeonhole him ideologically, you know, but you know, he believed the importance and power of education to start with. You know, he always used to say that if you give education to people, the poorest, there's a floor level below which they will not fall, you know. So for him, education was absolutely critical, and good governance. That if you have, educated people, you given them the tools, and then as government, you have transparent, open, and good governance. That this should transform, into a more prosperous society.
Right. He believed in handouts, so that made him, to some extent, a social welfarist kind of person. But was he also a capitalist?
Yes, I think he was. He believed obviously in the system as it is, which is obviously capitalism. I wouldn't say he believed in handouts. I don't know why you.
Well, I mean, he gave considerable amounts of money to people he felt needed that money. In other words, rather than sort of doing it any other way, sort of teaching them how to fish. He gave them fish.
No, there were economic policies.
Yeah.
For instance, some are borrowed from Brazil. That one of the ways to address acute poverty, would be certain social programs and some amounts of money to help people to set up businesses. But that was more an economic sort of decision that had worked, obviously, in a country as big as Brazil that has a lot of similarities to Nigeria, rather than him just favoring, handouts per se.
Minister, I want to thank you very much. Excuse me. I want to thank you very much indeed. You've been an absolute star, coming at short notice, and being able to share this very important moment in this country's history with us. Jeffrey Onyeama is Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the immediate past Minister of Foreign Affairs under President Buhari. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.